What would you do if you woke up one morning and your husband was gone? The Dear John, or Jane in this case, letter simply said he needed some time. And what would you do if you later found out that your husband wasn't who you thought he was? In fact, authorities had no idea who he actually was. And what would you do if 30 years later, neither you nor the authorities had any idea of his true identity? This is what happened to a woman in Indiana. I became involved in this case when they had questions about genealogy. Once those questions were answered, I found myself spending countless hours scouring the internet for clues. It is one of the most intriguing cases I have ever come across. Ordinarily, we wouldn't even know about a case like this. There's no identity. There's no missing persons flyers or publications on the normal databases. The reason we know this case exists is because this savvy detective on the case turned to the internet, the true crime community of web sleuths or citizen detectives or whatever we're called this week, to help him track down information on this mystery man. And despite this detective and the group of researchers spending thousands upon thousands of hours following multiple leads, we're still no closer to finding out the identity of the mystery man than when the investigation began. Which is where you come in. Take a minute. Listen to this fascinating story. I promise you won't be disappointed. Then share it. Someone out there knew this man before he disrupted this poor woman's life, and someone knew him after. If we can garner enough attention for this story, maybe the right person will see it, and we can finally give this woman the answers she deserves and close this case. So let me tell you the story of what some have dubbed the Invisible Man. I'm not a huge fan of that moniker. It seems to give him some kind of special powers, and in my mind, he's not special at all. He used people, he hurt them, he disrupted their lives, all for his own selfish reasons. So I'm going to call him Fake Paul. In 1990, around Sheridan, Indiana, in the suburbs of Indianapolis, a man claiming to be Paul Raymond Harrod was working at an assisted living facility. So was a woman that we'll call Mary, for the sake of her privacy. Mary had been married for over 10 years and had a preschool-aged son at the time. Rumor had it, Paul wasn't the easiest person to get along with. He could be what we would call difficult at times. That didn't seem to matter to Mary. Some women have an innate attraction to mysterious men and perceived bad boys. Whether this was the case with Mary or not, we don't really know, but it's possible. Mary and Paul began dating, and within a year, Mary moved in with Paul along with her son. We don't have any details on how or when Mary separated from her husband. Paul was renting to own the home he was living in on Werman Street in Sheridan. At the time, Paul was working 3 jobs: at the assisted living facility where he met Mary, as a janitor at St. Vincent's Hospital, and delivering newspapers for the Indianapolis Star. Mary would later describe Paul as being secretive about many aspects of his life. Things such as the large scar on his head that extended from the crown all the way down to his hairline at the nape of his neck, or other facts about his history, often went without explanation. Mary's divorce from her husband was finalized in November of 1991. In June of 1992, about 8 months later, Mary agreed to marry Paul, despite knowing very little about his background. Mary was the type of person that was okay with knowing not very many of the juicy details of someone's past. They filed for a marriage license with the Hamilton County Clerk of Courts. Paul listed his age as 50, although he certainly didn't look it. His place of birth was Illinois, and his parents were listed as Paul L. Harrod and Margaret Coletti, both born in Chicago. Paul listed one prior marriage that ended in divorce in November of 1985. He told Mary his previous wife's name was Diana Ray. She couldn't recall her maiden name. And that they were married in either Wichita, Kansas, or Kansas City, Missouri. Mary and Paul's wedding was reportedly a very small, intimate affair with only several people attending, all family and friends of Mary. It was held at Mary's mother's home in Michigantown, Indiana. Paul's best man was a co-worker of Paul's whom the priest had asked to stand in for him. He had no known friends or family in the area. At some point in 1992, Paul purchased a brand new white Geo Metro. Ooh. This will become important later. Paul, with his secretive nature, was not one for pillow talk, so he surprised Mary one night when laying in bed. He told her, "I could just disappear, you know. I know how to do it." He also shared several other tidbits with her and her family over the years, including that he had previously worked at Harrod's casino in Las Vegas and that he was in the military. He specifically mentioned flying over the military base in Greenland, although Mary was unable to recall if he had said he was stationed there or just did a flyover. He mentioned growing up in the Bronx. Mary would later tell the detective that while he said certain words kind of strange, it didn't sound like a New York accent. Another time he told Mary he was from Evanston, Illinois, which matched the information he put on his marriage license. Mary recalled him being a good cook and him mentioning that his mother was Italian. Then came Thanksgiving, November 26th, 1992. Paul and Mary attended a Thanksgiving dinner together. This photograph was taken that day and is the last known photo of fake Paul. They drove separately to dinner and then back home, each doing their own thing in the evening. At some point, Paul indicated that he either had to make a phone call or he was going to receive a phone call and drove to a local payphone. Mary doesn't recall anything specific about Paul's behavior on that evening. The following day, on November 27th of 1992, Mary awoke to find Paul gone, and a note in her mailbox from him. He said he needed to get away for a while. It had a $100 bill attached to it. It should be noted that the exact content of the note is not known, as Mary didn't save it. But this was the last time Paul Raymond Harrod was ever seen or heard from. Several months later, Mary started receiving phone calls from the finance company regarding the missed payments on the Geo Metro, which was missing along with Paul. Mary was told, as Paul's wife, she would be responsible for the payments. You see, Mary hadn't filed a missing persons report for Paul. There was no proof he was missing outside of Mary's assertions. After all, Paul said he needed some time, leading one to believe he might be back eventually. The GMAC investigator who was involved in the case mentioned to Mary that Paul had another Social Security number. It's not known what this number was or what name was associated with it. It's believed that this fact, along with the advice from the finance company, is what led Mary to eventually file the missing persons report with the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office. Adults who appeared to be voluntarily missing were not high-priority cases in the early 90s. This case, however, was inadvertently shuffled to the bottom of a pile and overlooked for nearly 20 years. When the case of fake Paul Raymond Harrod was discovered in 2013, it was assigned to Detective Greg Lockhart with the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office. Detective Lockhart began working on the case as soon as it hit his desk and has not stopped for the past 10 years. As soon as he started digging, things immediately got interesting. It was quickly determined that the name and social security number fake Paul was using belonged to a young boy born in Evanston, Illinois, on February 2nd, 1942. This was the date of birth and birthplace that fake Paul had been using. That young boy died in Ohio in 1947 at the age of 5. The real Paul Raymond Harrod was nicknamed Skippy. He was on a holiday trip to Ohio with his parents from their home in Illinois to visit family. He was playing in the street and was tragically hit and killed by a car. Skippy's death was covered by many newspapers in the region, as such a cause of death for a young child was pretty rare at the time. Skippy's parents' names were Paul Monroe Harrod and Mary Eleanor Condon. They were originally from Ohio, but had moved to Evanston, Illinois. Remember, fake Paul's marriage license listed his parents as Paul L. Harrod and Margaret Coletti. Was this a mistake in remembering the details of his fake past? Or did fake Paul accidentally put correct information on the marriage license for his mother? Due to fake Paul's secretive nature and the obscure details he told Mary through the years, there wasn't much for Detective Lockhart to go on to track him down beyond the use of Skippy's social security number. An investigator specializing in social security was consulted. It was determined that fake Paul applied for the number in 1987 using an address in Eagletown, Indiana, which is just outside of Sheridan. The investigator also traced fake Paul's work history using Skippy's number. They confirmed that he had worked at the assisted living facility, at St. Vincent's Hospital, and delivering papers for the Star. They further found that he had worked as a delivery driver for Chesty Chips. He was wearing a Chesty Chips jacket in the last known photo of him, and one of only several photos available. He also worked as a clerk at a liquor store in Westfield, Indiana. The detective obtained a copy of his application for employment with St. Vincent's Hospital, and on the application, he listed his education as Roosevelt High School in Yonkers, New York. Detective Lockhart contacted the school, but of course they had no record of anyone with that name ever attending, since Skippy never got the chance to go to high school. There was another interesting hit on Skippy's social security number. It was used to open a bank account in Hoven, South Dakota, not long after Paul disappeared. A small amount of money remained in the account at the end of 1992, according to the year-end statement. But then there was no further activity on the account. After this, there's no trace of Paul until January of 1994, when the white Geo Metro showed up at a used car auction in Englewood, Colorado. Since this information wasn't discovered until 20 years later, the details of the transaction are limited. Detective Lockhart was able to confirm the VIN number, but the dealership that took the Metro to the auction had no record of how it was obtained. They reportedly said it could have come from another state, as they often shipped vehicles around. They were also unsure whether it was traded in or if it was repossessed. A civil judgment was filed against fake Paul in the Hamilton County Superior Court in the amount of $9,087 on July 26, 1993, presumably for the Geo Metro. A second judgment was filed against him on July 13, 1994 by Midwest Credit Services. In 1997, it was dismissed due to not being able to locate him. And this is the last known record of fake Paul Raymond Harrod.